Today we will look at two plane crashes, their consequences and causes. Enjoy watching. On January 3, 1982, a severe snowstorm hit Washington, paralyzing ground transportation. City services worked at full capacity to clear the streets of snow. At the time, there were heavy traffic jams, including on the bridge over the Potomac River. People sat in their cars, hearing only the hum of engines. Above them flew a Boeing 737-200 operated by Air Florida, performing Flight 90 on the Washington-Tampa-Fort Lauderdale route. According to the schedule, the aircraft was supposed to depart Washington at 2:15 p.m., but due to the heavy snowfall, the national airport was closed for departures, delaying Flight 90. The Boeing 737 requested and received clearance for an instrument flight and began loading passengers and cargo. The loading process lasted about 30 minutes. On board were 5 crew members and 74 passengers. At approximately 2:20 p.m., the ground crew began de-icing the left side of the aircraft at the request of the crew. According to maintenance personnel, the plane was covered with a snow layer approximately 1.5 centimeters thick. When the de-icing process began, only about 3 meters of the surface had been treated when the captain of Flight 90 interrupted the procedure. It had become clear that the airport would not reopen at 2:30 p.m. as initially expected. Later, at approximately 2:50 p.m., the captain requested that the de-icing procedures resume. The ground crew began with the left side of the aircraft. According to the operator, the wheels, fuselage, wings, empennage, pylons, and front sections of the engines were treated with a hot solution containing 40% glycol and 60% water. No additional aerosol treatment was applied after this process. The choice of solution was based on the weather forecast. Particular attention was given to the hinges of the empennage's control surfaces to ensure there was no ice or snow in these critical areas. The left side of the plane received more solution because it had accumulated more snow. By around 3:15 p.m., the aircraft's doors were closed, and the telescopic ramp was retracted. The captain of Flight 90 asked an Air Florida manager standing near the main door how much snow he could see on the aircraft. The manager replied that there was light snow on the wing surfaces from the tip to the engine, while the area between the engine and fuselage was clean. The heavy snowfall continued at this time. The aircraft was prepared for towing. Ground service personnel noticed water from melting snow entering the left engine. The captain shut down the engines for inspection. A mechanic checked the engine's inlet guide vanes and found no signs of ice or snow. At approximately 3:35 p.m., Flight 90 was towed away from the gate without further issues. After the tow tractor was detached, the crew restarted the engines. The aircraft was ready to taxi to the runway. The first officer read out the post-engine start checklist and reached the item for anti-ice systems, to which the response was, off. The dispatcher warned Flight 90 about an American Airlines aircraft taxiing away from the gate. The crew reported that they were ready to taxi. The dispatcher instructed them to follow a McDonnell Douglas DC-9 operated by New York Air. At the time, 16 airliners were waiting to depart from the apron. As recorded by the cockpit voice recorder, the crew considered returning to the hangar for additional anti-icing treatment but decided against it. They believed that the small amount of snow on the wings would blow off during the takeoff roll at 80 knots. The crew also regarded the procedure as more of a safety ritual than a necessity. At approximately 3:58 p.m., Flight 90 was cleared to take position at the start of the runway and prepare for immediate takeoff. Once the aircraft lined up, the dispatcher gave them clearance to take off, instructing them not to delay. This was the last radio transmission from Flight 90. As soon as the aircraft lifted off, the nose pitched sharply upward. Severe vibrations began, and the stall warning system activated. After traveling just over a kilometer from the runway at an altitude of 11 meters, Flight 90 struck the 14th Street Bridge, which connects Washington to Arlington County. The aircraft destroyed 6 cars and overturned a truck on the bridge. It also tore away a 12.5-meter section of the bridge surface before crashing into the ice on the Potomac River, breaking through it and sinking. In the crash, 74 people died, including 4 crew members, 2 pilots, 2 flight attendants, and 70 passengers. 5 people survived, 1 flight attendant and 4 passengers. 4 people on the bridge were killed, and several others were injured. In total, 78 people lost their lives in the crash. The 5 survivors found themselves in the icy water, clinging to debris from the aircraft's tail section. About an hour later, a police helicopter arrived. The rescue operation lasted approximately 15 minutes. All 5 survivors were saved, but another passenger, who initially survived the crash, drowned while attempting to help others. The National Transportation Safety Board investigated the causes of the crash. After a week of searching, both flight recorders were retrieved from the riverbed, quickly identifying the causes of the accident. The primary cause was wing icing, which occurred during the prolonged delay at Washington National Airport. The crew did not treat the aircraft with anti-icing fluid immediately before takeoff, and the ice-covered wings were unable to generate sufficient lift. Additionally, the pitot tubes froze, resulting in erroneous instrument readings in the cockpit. The captain relied on these incorrect readings and failed to consider engine control instruments, setting engine thrust 30% below the required level during takeoff. The NTSB also noted that the pilot's actions after takeoff were inadequate. While the crew correctly maintained the pitch angle, they failed to increase engine thrust in time to gain airspeed and avoid the collision with the bridge. Experts pointed out that the captain did not abort the takeoff early during the rollout, despite the first officer drawing attention to unusual instrument readings. It was also revealed that the captain was not originally scheduled to operate this flight. He had planned to spend his day off with his son but agreed to swap shifts with a colleague, a fateful decision in the chain of events leading to the tragedy. On September 21, 2001, an Ilyushin IL-86 aircraft operated by Aeroflot was performing Flight 521 on the Moscow-Dubai route. There were 322 people on board. The flight was operated by an experienced crew. The aircraft was approaching its destination and following the landing pattern for Dubai Airport. Aircraft were required to deploy their landing gear just before touching down on the runway to reduce noise while flying over residential areas. This reduced aerodynamic drag and required less engine thrust and power. However, the IL-86 was equipped with an audible and visual gear warning system that activated automatically when the flaps were deployed into the landing position. To avoid distractions between the moments of flap deployment and gear extension, the captain decided to disable the warning system, despite it being a violation of flight operation manuals. The flight engineer began reading the checklist and answering all its items independently, violating standard protocol. The captain, co-pilot, and navigator did not supervise his actions. As a result, the flight engineer mistakenly assumed the landing gear had been deployed. None of the crew in the cockpit verified this step, partly due to the disabled gear warning system. At 20:09, with extended wing flaps but retracted landing gear, Flight 521 landed on the runway at Dubai Airport. As the aircraft slid along the runway, engines 2 and 3 caught fire, along with the rear cargo compartment. The fact that the landing gear had not been deployed was discovered by one of the flight attendants. Thanks to the timely actions of the airport's emergency services, the fire was quickly extinguished, and all passengers and crew were evacuated. None of the 322 people on board were injured or killed. An investigation into the causes of Flight 521's accident was conducted by the General Civil Aviation Authority of the United Arab Emirates, Russian experts from the Interstate Aviation Committee, representatives of Aviation Design Bureau, and Aeroflot officials. According to the investigation's findings, the accident was caused by the crew's failure to follow the procedures prescribed in the Flight Operation Manual. The pilots were also hindered by differences in landing procedures between Russian and international airports. In Russia, during landing, aircraft typically deploy their landing gear first, followed by the flaps. Internationally, the process is reversed. Extended landing gear creates additional drag in the airflow, increasing noise levels during landing. International noise regulations are stricter, and deploying landing gear prematurely is prohibited in many foreign airports. While operating in international airports, Russian pilots follow local rules, but the aircraft's automation remains aligned with the Russian procedures programmed by the manufacturer. This results in alarms and warning lights activating when standard international procedures are followed. Pilots often disable the alarms to avoid distractions, which is prohibited by regulations, as was the case with Flight 521. The pilot's errors extended beyond this. During the landing, the co-pilot was flying the aircraft, while the captain was instructing him on landing techniques in foreign airports. Both pilots failed to monitor the flight engineer, whose actions they were required to supervise according to standard procedures. Left unsupervised, the flight engineer had to ask himself the mandatory landing questions and answer them on his own. Frequency set. Pressure calibrated. Landing beacon detected. Speed 300. Landing gear deployed, he said, but he did not actually extend the landing gear. On the same day, Aeroflot compensated the passengers, paying $400 to each. The airline also had to pay $10 million in damages to Dubai Airport for a 13-hour closure caused by the blocked runway. At Dubai Airport, the flight certificates of all 4 cockpit crew members were revoked. Subsequently, Aeroflot dismissed the deputy flight director, the squadron commander for IL-86 aircraft, and the commander of the flight unit. The landing without landing gear caused damage to the aircraft's airframe, power plants, and the left wing's structural panels near the front spar. Part of the wing burned. The aircraft was written off and, later in 2001, its fuselage was sunk in the Persian Gulf to be used as a dive site for amateur divers.